Hello and welcome to Prime Code Media. In this video, I'll be discussing the Bootstrap Grid System. One of the most important decisions you'll have to make when working with CSS is to lay out and align content on your web page and to ensure that the layout is responsive. A responsive layout is able to adapt to different screen or viewport sizes. For example, let's take a look at gumroad.com. This is how the web page looks like. I want us to specifically focus on their offerings and how they are being laid out. And as you can see, these columns are sitting next to each other. It's 3 columns a row. Now let's see how they look on a smaller screen. Now I'm going to squeeze the screen, and you'll see at around this point there's a break point from medium screen to smaller screen. These columns get stacked on top of each other. They are no longer sitting next to each other, and that is the case on the size of your iPad. Even on smaller screens that can be the size of a smartphone, they still look the same. That is stacked on top of each other. And when we enlarge the screen, you'll see that they go back to that initial layout of 3 columns a row. And this shows that this layout is responsive. So we can also create a responsive layout like this using Bootstrap's Grid System. Now inside CodeBly, I have selected Bootstrap 5, which is the latest version of this front end framework, and I am going to create my own columns inside here. The first thing that I am going to do is to add a div like so. I'm going to give this div a class of container. Okay, I'm going to give this a class of container. I'm also going to give it a background color. I'm going to style it. Let me include a style attribute, and then I'm going to give it a background color. I'm going to use color hunt to pick up a background color. Okay, so let me see. Let me just pick this one. I think this one will work fine. If it doesn't look good, we can always change it. So I'm going to paste the hex code inside here. Remember, it's important that you make sure that the hex code is preceded by the hashtag sign. Now inside this container, I'm going to add another div, and this div I'm going to give it a class of row. Then inside this div I'm going to add another div, and then I am going to give this div a class of column, and I'm also going to style this column like so. I'm going to give this column a solid border. I'm going to say border solid, and then it's going to have a red color. I'm also going to give it a name. I'm going to give it a name of the class that it carries. Now let's run this code and see what we get. Now this is what we have. We have now a column that has a red solid border. Now this column takes up the entire width of the screen, and this is because the class column, what the class column does is that it splits the row into as many parts as it's needed in order to accommodate the columns. For example, I'm going to copy this column. I'm going to copy this column and paste it here so that we have 2 columns. You'll see what happens when I run this code. Now we have 2 columns of equal size, and this confirms what I've just said, and that is the class, this class here, splits the row into as many parts as is needed in order to accommodate the columns. Now, what if we want to create a column, but we don't want it to take up the entire width of the container? Okay, so let's say, for example, we want the column to take up just half of the width. So we can do that by using a column number and specify the amount of space that we want our column to take. But before we do that, let's go to our documentation and see what it says. You'll see, for example, when we scroll down here, it says here there are 12 template columns available per row, allowing you to create different combinations of elements that span any number of columns. What this means is that a single row is made up of 12 units. So if we create a column, and give it a class of column 6, the column will only take half of the row, because out of 12 units we will only be taking how many? 6. So let's put this into practice. To do that, I'm going to copy this entire row like so and paste it here. So I'm going to delete this first column. Okay, I'm going to delete the first column, and I'm going to give this column a class of column 6, and let me just change the color so that this one is also clearly visible. I'm going to give this one a green color. Let me also give it a name of the class, of its class. So let me run the code. Now we have another column. Now, as you can see here, we were specific to say that we want a column, but we don't want our column to take up the entire width of the container. We said we want the container to take half of the width, that is 6 units, because the entire width is made up of 12 units. Now let's fill this row by creating other columns and give them different numbers. So I'm just going to copy this column and paste it twice so that we have 3 of them. I'm going to give this one, call this one column 4, so it's going to take 4 units, and this one 2 units. I'm also going to specify this here. So here it will be 4, and then here 2. So now let's run this code. Now there we go. As you can see, we have filled the entire row with columns of different sizes. So it's 6 plus 4 plus 2, which equals how much? 12 units, which confirms what I was saying again earlier, and that is a single row is made up of 12 units. At the moment we have these 4 columns. Now these 5 columns actually. So but before we go ahead, let me just delete this column. I'm going to delete this column, and then I'm going to change the class here and make it a 6. And then I'm also going to give this a name, and then let me run this code. At the moment now we have 2 rows that each have 2 equal size columns. So now the rows and their columns are of the same size, but to create them, we created them differently. Firstly, as I explained earlier, this one, we were able to create these ones by using the class column, and the class column splits the row into equal sizes in order to accommodate columns, and that is why we have two columns of equal size, the red ones. And then secondly, here with regards to the green ones, here we were specific to say we want our columns to take 6 units of our rows, and that is why here we have equal size columns once again. Right now, though, these columns are not responsive, meaning that they do not adapt to different screen or viewport sizes. So they stay the same no matter the size we view them from. So for example, this is how they look on a large viewport. This is the size of your laptop or desktop. Let's see how they look on a medium size screen. This is the size of your iPad. So nothing changes. So they still look the same even on smaller screens of the size of a smartphone. Nothing changes. So they are not responsive. So we can make them responsive using the grid system. Like I showed you earlier with the Gumroad web page, as I was saying earlier, as you can see, it is responsive. So we can also create columns that adapt to different screen sizes like these ones on gumroad.com. So to do that, I'm going to come back here inside CodePly, and I am going to copy this row here. I'm going to copy this row and paste it right here. Now what I am going to do, before we even go ahead and create these responsive web columns, let's just check what the documentation says. For example, so inside the documentation under responsive classes, there's a lot of information in terms of how you can create these responsive classes. So you'll see, for example, here is an example of the code or the class that you will use. So for example, you'll say the column on small screens should take, for example, 8 units. So this is just an example of what you can create. Here I am going to say these columns, I want these columns on medium screens to take up 6 units. Again here I'm going to do the same. So these columns on medium screens, they are going to take 6 units of the screen. So I'm going to do the same. Let me also change the name here. I'm going to say on medium screens, I'm going to give these columns the names of the classes. I'm also going to change, let me change the color so that everything is clear. Let me just give these ones orange color. I hope everything is clear. Orange. Now let me run the code and see if everything is rendered accordingly. Now right now we have managed to add 2 columns. So we have now 6 columns of equal size. So now the difference right now is that the columns that we have just added are responsive. This is how these columns look on a large screen. Now let's see how they look on a smaller screen. You'll see that when we move to a smaller screen, these columns get stacked on top of each other, while those ones that we created earlier, they are still sitting next to each other. So which means these ones are responsive, because with this class here, what we are saying is that this column is going to take 6 units. Okay, it is going to take 6 units on any size from medium, empty for medium, upwards. So from the size of your iPad upwards, this column is going to take 6 units, and this is what it does. And you'll see that on smaller screens it takes up the entire width, and it is only on large viewports that it takes up half of the screen. Now let's take things further and create a row that has 4 columns that are able to adapt to different viewports. To do that, let me again collapse this JavaScript. I'm going to once again just copy this row here, and then I'm going to paste it right here. So I'm going to copy these columns and paste them underneath here so that we have 4 of them. I'm going to change these classes. So each column is going to take 3 units. So I'm going to change these numbers from 6 to 3, like so. And then I'm also going to give them the names of their classes. So I'm just going to come here and delete the name, replace it with this. So like so. Okay, let me just do this. Okay, what else do I need to change? I'm just going to change the color so that these ones are also visible, so that they do not clash with the other colors, so that we are able to clearly see them. Change them to blue, all of them. Okay, like so. Blue. So all these columns now have a blue color. Now let's run this code and see what we get. Now we have a row that is made up of 4 columns, and then on a large screen these columns take 3 units. And then you'll see that when we view these columns on smaller screens like so, they get stacked on top of each other. So let's see how they look. Let's do this. You'll see at around this point they get stacked on top of each other, but on larger viewports they take 3 units. To fully understand the grid system concept, it's important that you play around with the code and regularly consult the documentation to find out more about how you can lay out and align content on web pages. That's what I did, and while I did, I managed to create a simple catalog which has images and some lorem ipsum text, and this is how it looks on a large viewport. Now let's see how it looks on a smaller screen. On a smaller screen, this is how it looks, and as you can see, there's different breakpoints from this breakpoint to this one to this one. So this catalog is responsive, and I was able to create this catalog after learning and understanding the grid system concept. So this is possible. You can also be able to create something like this once you have fully gotten around how the Bootstrap Grid System works. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. Let's code again next time. Take care. Bye.